my name is Schyler Church. I am a California real estate broker, as well though as a member of the education department at Accredited Real Estate Schools. And we provide the course requirements to be eligible to take the state exam, but also a ton of different preparation options to make sure you're ready for that state test. And today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about appraisal. Appraisal is a really huge area on the California state exam. It's area 3, so you really do need to know about it. But we're going to talk about the basic fundamentals of it and hopefully kind of give you an idea of it. And then you can take this and extrapolate it to more concepts of it. So what is an appraisal? Well, it's an estimate of the value of a parcel of real property. So when we're looking at it from a real estate perspective, we have appraisers. They are professionals in estimating and coming up with an opinion of value for a property. So they use principles and approaches. So they have a lot of experience and training in understanding how to look at a property and figuring out what the best or what its true opinion of value or true value is. But of course, it's just an opinion. Every appraiser can look at it a little bit differently, but they use the same approaches and there is a different license. So I do want to let you know, if you are wanting to be an appraiser, there is an appraiser's license you have to get, which requires thousands of shadowed hours, an exam to pass. Very different than if you're wanting to get your real estate license. But as a real estate agent, you need to be aware of appraisals because appraisals are a huge part of our industry because they are used mostly by lenders to determine whether a parcel of real property will be sufficient collateral or security for a loan. So a lot of times buyers want to purchase a property, but to be able to, they don't have all the money. And so they go to a lender and the lender will loan them money to purchase this property. Well, lenders want to be aware that when they are basically lending out this set amount of money, that it is to its true value of the property. So if for some reason the buyer were to stop making payments and default on the loan, then the appraiser would be able to foreclose and recoup the money that they lent. Of course, though, the market is always cyclical. Things go up and down. But if the borrower were to basically default right away, the lender has a good chance of recouping the money. And that's why they use an independent third-party appraiser to assist with making sure they're not giving too much money out for property that's not worth it, for instance. So that's why appraisals are very important, and they do dictate the market a lot of times. And understanding how appraisals are created, how to read them, and to make sure your transaction can go smoothly. So the outcomes of appraisals, I want to make sure you're aware of them. So we have an independent third-party appraiser that will give their opinion of value. Well, the appraisal valuation, if it comes in above the purchase price, so the price agreed upon between the buyer and the seller, well, that's actually good for the buyer. That means that the buyer is not overpaying, nor are they actually paying what they believe the true value of it is. They have actually right away equity in the home. They are going to have a little bit of what they pay, and then there's extra of what the appraiser believes the market value of it is. So maybe if the buyer were to turn around and sell it, they'd probably be able to sell it even at an increase. But this is just one opinion of value, but the appraiser is very educated and experienced in understanding how to come up with this opinion of value. Now, the best situation for both the seller and the buyer is the appraisal valuation comes in at the purchase price. So the appraiser agrees that the purchase price is what its true market value is. And so the seller is maximizing the amount of income or profit they're going to be receiving from this property. They're getting as much as possible out of it. And the buyer is paying only as much as what the value or the market dictates according to the appraiser. So the buyer is not overpaying, but the buyer might not necessarily be getting a screaming deal. Now, if the appraisal valuation comes in below the purchase price, this is really when it affects a transaction because the appraiser is saying, hey, you are overpaying for the property. So the lender's not going to be happy. And because of that, they're going to say, hey, this property that we're going to be loaning you money on, what you're asking us to loan you is not sufficient or it's too much. We won't be able to actually recoup this money if for some reason you are to default. So it's not sufficient collateral or security for the loan. So this is not an ideal situation. So either the buyer would have to come up with more funds, the seller would have to maybe agree to a decrease in the purchase price, or you fall out of contract, or you could even try and challenge the appraisal. I've done that a handful of times. It's very rare, but when it does happen, sometimes you can show the appraiser maybe they missed some valuable comps or important items about the properties. So it's really important then to understand appraisals. And so when you are assisting buyers and sellers with the process of selling and purchasing the home, and you're facilitating them with this transaction, that you have the best chance of making sure that the property is not, that it'll come in at the appraisal. That is really important. And so that's why it's important to understand appraisals and why you need to know them for the state exam as well as a licensed real estate agent. I do want to let you know about appraisals. So when we've talked about the appraisal valuation above the purchase price, you may think, oh, well, the seller's going to be not too happy about it. They're going to want more money then since they're taking a little bit less. Well, truthfully, what happens here with appraisers and the appraisals that are given, the appraisal is only to be given to the party that actually orders the appraisal. So usually it's buyer because the lender requires it. So if the appraisal comes in above or at the purchase price, the seller usually is only aware that, hey, appraisal came in good, we're set to proceed with the appraisal and the financing portion of this transaction. Well, if it comes in below purchase price, then the seller is usually brought into the loop to understand how low it was valued at and to try and come up with a solution for this. So just know the appraisal is only given to the party that orders it. So the seller is not actually privy to it unless they order an appraisal themselves. So value. Now that we've talked about an appraisal and kind of the outcomes of it, what are appraisers looking at? Well, they're looking at the actual value of the property. And the value is a relationship between a thing desired and the potential purchaser. And it's relative between each person. So that's why in the marketplace, you might be, when you get a bunch of offers, they might be at different price points because people look at it differently of how valuable it is to them or how much it's actually worth. So it's just like, for instance, on an everyday life, you're always making judgments on value. You go to the grocery store, what you're willing to pay for an item may be very different than what somebody else right next to you is, depending on what you like, what you can eat, depending on your dietary restrictions. So as well as where you live. So it's value is completely relative, and that's why the appraisers are giving an opinion of value, but each appraiser could have a different opinion on it based on their assumption or their belief about it. Now, how do we look at the actual elements of value to assist us in coming up with this value, this number? Well, we use this acronym called DUST. So what it stands for is demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. So demand, how popular is the item? Are people wanting to get it, purchase it? Are there a lot of people wanting it? And if so, usually the value increases, as well as the utility of it. How useful is it? Can you use the property? So for instance, can you live in the property? Is it one that can derive income? So that is a huge aspect of it, because if you're buying a property, for instance, that's a huge fixer, it's usually not going to be valued as much because it might not be turnkey, move-in ready. It might require more work. And so utility is an important feature of it, as well as scarcity. This ties into demand as well. So how much supply is there? So is there a lot of supply? If so, if there's a lot of supply and the demand basically remains constant, well, usually the prices then will either remain the same or maybe drop. But if the demand is high and the supply is low, then the value usually increases as well, because there's a lot of people wanting limited items. And then transferability. Can you actually sell the property? Can you transfer the title to someone else? So that's important to look at. So these are the elements of value, which is dust. But then we have forces affecting value. So we look at the political, economic, physical, social, aspects of it, and then I include them all. So we have an acronym, we say PEPC. So when we're talking about political, we're looking at what governmental powers are affecting it. So zoning, taxes, what legislation is affecting it from maybe the city, county, state, and even the the federal level. How is that affecting the item, so the property? Economic, so jobs and salary constraints. What about the cost of money? As well as physical, so how's the size, style, location of the property, those type of features of the actual being of the property. And then social, what's the lifestyle like, the proximity to shopping, job centers, what are the socioeconomics. And so that's why we have social, economic, political, and physical. And so we include them all, and that's how you get PEPC for the forces affecting value. So we've talked about the elements of value. What about the forces that affect it? So we take into consideration dust, PEPC, and then we also look at some principles of value. So this also comes into that you need to understand. So first off, marketability and acceptability. So are you able to sell or market the parcel of property, as well as is it going to be acceptable to the general buying public? So that's a huge one. That is something that affects pretty much any item that you're going to be purchasing, but especially with real estate. And also, one of the first things that appraiser looks at is the highest and best use of the land. So basically, what is the use for a parcel of real property that will provide the highest return to investor or buyer? So if there's a vacant land, the appraiser is going to try to determine what type of building would be the best to place on the parcel. And if they decide that there's already a pre-existing property on there that's not really adding any value to it, then the appraiser would subtract the demolition costs from it. So the highest and best use, subtract the demolition cost to then get an opinion of value when looking at the highest and best use. Then we have conformity. So when homes are similar in size and construction materials, they conform to a well-planned community, and that helps maintain property values. So if you're in an established neighborhood that's well taken care of, so that's why a lot of times HOAs can be useful, because they make sure that the property itself or the neighborhood is well taken care of, and they conform, so it assists with value. Then we have contribution. So contribution is looked at when it comes to income producing properties. So for instance, let's say when you as an owner are looking at an apartment building that you have, and you're thinking of doing a swimming pool. Well, if you are having a single family home, the cost of the swimming pool, usually you won't actually recoup when you sell it. But if you have an income producing property, what is going to be the effect of putting a swimming pool in it for the net income? Well, usually you can charge more in rents, so you will then derive more income due to it. So what is the contribution of the swimming pool to the net income? And so, for instance, when a property owner then adds that swimming pool to an apartment building and the pool increases the value of the property more than the cost of the swimming pool, this is what we call contribution. Then we also look at regression. So for instance, you are in maybe an older neighborhood, and they're all single-story homes, pretty basic, maybe range around the 1,000 square feet. Well, you over-improve your home to a two-story with 2,000 square feet. You might think you will be able to get a lot more money for it because of maybe the price per square foot. Well, if you're surrounded by homes that are of lesser value and not great, well, then you're over-improving it, and your home of greater value is adversely affected by the houses of comparably lesser value. And that's called regression. Then we have assemblage, which is basically placing two or more properties under one ownership with the resulting value of the combined parcel being greater than the total purchase prices of the two parcels individually. And that's called assemblage. So let's say there's maybe two properties that you have, maybe commercial. One is a grocery store and one is like a little strip mall for retail. Well, if you were to combine those parcels of property and maybe create a giant commercial strip center or like a mall, for instance, and you get an increase in value because of that, this is with through assemblage. And if you, so I do want to specify something though, is when the increase in property value is not due to the owner's actions, but actually occurs through like market forces out of the owner's control, that's an unearned increment. And so a little bit different than assemblage. Now, what about anticipation? Anticipation is something that we actually talk about when it comes to the income or the capitalization approach. So when an investor, for instance, purchases an income property in anticipation of a future income stream, this is what they're looking at is the principle of anticipation. So for instance, an investor may be willing to pay $1 million to obtain an annual income of $70,000 over the holding period of the property, and that would be a 7% return on the investor's money, and that 7% is the capitalization rate. So that is the principle of anticipation. Then we also have the principle of substitution, and this is used with the market data approach. So when you're substituting one property for another. So for instance, a property that is sold and that is compared or substituted with another subject property, you can make the comparison between those two properties. And that is common with single family homes especially. And so we're going to talk about this a little bit more and how these principles are used within the approaches that appraisers use. So there are 3 approaches that are used, and the most common, readily used one is the comparison approach called the market data approach. This uses the principle of substitution, and it's the most readily adaptable and usable approach. So us as real estate agents rely on this approach because we use it most often with single family homes and unimproved land where we're able to compare. So when we're saying we're using comps, we're able to look at comparable properties in the area and make adjustments to come up with a value for our subject property. Now, the income approach, capitalization approach, this is used to appraise value of income producing properties. So you convert an income stream into value. So this is usually for multi-unit residential apartment buildings, leased investments. Those are when you're dealing with income properties. As well as what about the cost approach? So this is one that is more involved. It's difficult. Appraisers have a lot of experience in it, but because they look at the actual cost to build a building, so like the house, so look at the improvements of the home and the cost to build them on a parcel of land, and they add it to the land value to determine the overall property value. So within the cost approach, it's interesting. This is used mostly for special purpose and service buildings, new residences, construction that's new, and older homes. So ones that are harder to compare to other properties. And the cost approach, the biggest thing is we actually look at the value of land by using the market data approach to come up with the value of land. And then we look at the cost of the building to produce the building. We look at the replacement or the reproduction cost of it. And then we add those two numbers together, the cost to build the improvements and the market value of the land. And that is how we get an opinion of value for the cost approach. Now, about these, we look at everything we've talked about. So it's a lot that goes into it, and they reconcile everything to come up with the final opinion of value. So as you can see, there's a lot to it. You need to know a lot about this. This was just the basics of it. And I hope this was a helpful video for you. If you have any questions or anything that we can help you with at Accredited, feel free to contact us because we would be glad to assist you. Otherwise, good luck with your licensing journey.